Captain Sarah Mitchell stood in the briefing room at Fort Carson, Colorado, her hand resting gently on her rounded belly. 6 months pregnant, she had been reassigned from field duty to administrative work and training. But even in her condition, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had earned every stripe on her uniform. "You've got to be kidding me," Lieutenant Derek Hastings muttered, just loud enough for the room to hear. "They're letting her teach the course?" A few snickers rippled through the group of young soldiers gathered for the Advanced Explosive Ordnance Disposal refresher training. Sarah didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. Much worse. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I'm Captain Mitchell, and I'll be your lead instructor for the next 2 weeks. I have over 8 years of field experience in EOD, including 3 deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. I've successfully defused or disposed of more than 200 explosive devices." Lieutenant Hastings leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "With all due respect, ma'am," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "shouldn't you be on desk duty? I mean, how are you going to show us anything in your condition?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Sarah. She met Hastings's gaze without blinking. "My condition, Lieutenant, doesn't affect my brain or my experience," she replied calmly. "I'm here to teach you theory, recognition, and decision-making. The physical demonstrations will be handled by Sergeant Reynolds." A muscular sergeant near the front nodded respectfully. He'd worked with Sarah before and knew exactly what she was capable of. But Hastings wasn't done. "I just think it's a waste of time. We need instructors who are actually in fighting shape, not someone who's going to be changing diapers in 3 months. Sarah felt the familiar burn of anger in her chest, but she kept her face neutral. She'd fought too hard and too long to let someone like Hastings get under her skin. She'd been one of only 12 women in her EOD class. She'd outperformed most of the men. She'd earned her position through sweat, skill, and nerves of steel. "This conversation is over, Lieutenant," she said firmly. "If you have concerns about my qualifications, you can take them up with Colonel Patterson. Otherwise, we have work to do." The training proceeded, but the tension remained. Over the next few days, Sarah noticed the whispers, the rolled eyes, the barely concealed contempt from Hastings and a few others who thought like him. They saw her pregnancy as weakness, as proof she didn't belong. But Sarah had supporters too. Sergeant First Class Maria Gonzalez, one of the few other women in the EOD unit, often ate lunch with her. "Don't let them get to you," Maria said one afternoon in the cafeteria. "They're intimidated. You've done things they can only dream about." Sarah smiled weakly. "I know, but sometimes I wonder if they're right. Maybe I should have taken full leave when I found out I was pregnant." "And let them think they won?" Maria shook her head firmly. "No way. You're still one of the best we have. Your mind is your weapon, Sarah. Always has been." Sarah's husband, Tom, a civilian engineer, said much the same thing when she called him that evening. "You're brilliant," he reminded her. "That baby you're carrying is lucky to have a mom who's not only brave but also refuses to back down from ignorance." "I just wish it wasn't such a fight all the time," Sarah admitted. "I'm tired, Tom. Physically, emotionally, I'm just tired." "I know, sweetheart, but you're almost through this rotation. Then you can take your maternity leave and focus on getting ready for our little one." Sarah hung up feeling slightly better, but the doubt lingered. Maybe she was proving a point that didn't need proving. Maybe she should have stepped back. The next morning, everything changed. It was Tuesday, just after 700 hours. Sarah was setting up the classroom when alarms began blaring throughout the base. Her phone buzzed urgently. It was Colonel Patterson. "Captain Mitchell, report to the command center immediately." Her heart racing, Sarah made her way across the base. The command center was chaos. Officers rushed between stations, radios crackled, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Colonel Patterson, a stern man in his 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes, spotted her immediately. "Captain, we have a situation," he said, pulling her aside. Construction crew was digging near the old munitions storage area in Sector 7. They've uncovered what appears to be a Mark 82 500-pound bomb. Vintage, probably from the 1960s when this section was used for demolition training. Sarah's blood ran cold. A Mark 82 was no joke. If it was live and unstable, it could level everything within 1,000 feet. "Is it armed?" she asked immediately. "Unknown." The crew backed off as soon as they saw it. "We've evacuated a half-mile radius, but we need confirmation on its status, and if it's live." He paused. "We need it defused or safely detonated." "Where's Lieutenant Commander Price?" Sarah asked, referring to the senior EOD officer. "Off base at a conference in Washington. Won't be back until tomorrow morning at the earliest. Captain Lee is handling a suspicious package situation downtown with local PD. You're the most experienced EOD officer we have on base right now." Sarah's mind raced. "Sir, I'm pregnant. I'm not cleared for field operations." "I know," Patterson said, his expression grave. "I'm not ordering you to do anything. We have Sergeant Reynolds and a few others who can attempt it. But Sarah," he lowered his voice, "that bomb has been in the ground for 60 years. It could be corroded, unstable, rigged with a secondary device. You know as well as I do that experience matters in situations like this." Sarah stood frozen, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. Inside her, she felt a flutter. The baby moving, alive, trusting her to keep them both safe. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to say no, to walk away, to protect her unborn child at all costs. But another part of her, the soldier, the expert who'd trained for years to handle exactly this kind of threat, knew the truth. If that bomb was as unstable as it could be, sending someone less experienced might get them killed. It might also fail to neutralize the threat, putting hundreds of people at risk. "Let me see the reconnaissance photos," she said quietly. Patterson led her to a computer terminal. On screen were images from a drone hovering over the excavation site. There, partially unearthed from the dirt, was the unmistakable shape of a Mark 82. Its casing was rusted and corroded, covered in decades of soil and moisture. Sarah's experienced eye immediately caught several troubling details. The nose cone appeared damaged. There was unusual discoloration around the fuse well, and the angle at which it sat suggested it might have shifted recently, possibly when the construction equipment disturbed the ground around it. "This is bad," she murmured. "Really bad. That corrosion pattern suggests the casing might be compromised. And if the fuse is original, it could be incredibly sensitive to movement or vibration." "Can Reynolds handle it?" Patterson asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Sarah thought of Sergeant Reynolds. He was skilled, competent, and brave, but he had 3 years of experience to her 8. He'd never encountered a vintage device like this. He'd trained on modern IEDs and ordnance, not 60-year-old American bombs that had been slowly degrading underground. "He could," she said slowly, "but the risk of a mistake is significantly higher. These old bombs are unpredictable. The explosives inside break down over time, sometimes becoming more sensitive. The fuses corrode and can become unstable. One wrong move, one unexpected vibration." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Patterson understood. "What do you recommend?" he asked. Before Sarah could answer, Lieutenant Hastings strode into the command center. He'd apparently been summoned as well. "Sir, I heard about the situation," he said, saluting crisply. "Sergeant Reynolds and I are ready to handle it. We'll get a robot down there for initial assessment and then proceed with either defusal or controlled detonation." Patterson glanced at Sarah. "Captain?" Mitchell was just providing her expert assessment. Hastings looked at Sarah, and she saw the familiar condescension in his eyes. "With respect, sir, we don't need assessments right now. We need action. Reynolds and I can handle this. Captain Mitchell should focus on, well, staying safe." His eyes dropped to her belly for just a moment. Sarah felt anger flare in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "Lieutenant, have you ever dealt with vintage American ordnance from the 1960s? "I've studied it in training," he replied defensively. "Studied it," Sarah repeated. "I've defused 3 similar devices in the field. These bombs are nothing like modern ordnance. The chemistry of the explosives changes over time. The mechanical fuses can become hypersensitive, and this one shows signs of casing failure, which means even a robot's vibration could potentially set it off." Hastings's jaw tightened. "So what are you suggesting? That you waddle down there in your condition and play hero?" The room went silent. Several officers turned to stare at Hastings, shocked by his blatant disrespect. "Lieutenant," Colonel Patterson's voice was ice cold, You will address Captain Mitchell with proper respect or you will be removed from this command center. Am I clear? Hastings' face reddened. Yes, sir. My apologies, Captain. But his eyes told a different story. He wasn't sorry. He was furious that she was even part of the conversation. Sarah took a deep breath. She thought of Tom, of the nursery they'd been painting last weekend, of the tiny clothes folded in drawers at home. She thought of the ultrasound image on her refrigerator, their baby girl sucking her thumb. But she also thought of the families living in the housing units within the evacuation zone. She thought of the young soldiers on this base, many of them barely 20 years old. She thought of her oath, her duty, and the skills she'd spent years developing precisely for moments like this. Sir, she said to Patterson, I'd like to at least supervise the operation from the mobile command unit. I can guide Reynolds through it remotely. That keeps me at a safe distance while ensuring we have the best possible outcome. Patterson nodded slowly. That's acceptable. Lieutenant Hastings, you'll assist Sergeant Reynolds with equipment prep. Captain Mitchell will direct the operation from the MCU. Hastings looked like he wanted to argue, but he simply saluted and left. 20 minutes later, Sarah was seated in the mobile command unit, a reinforced vehicle parked a quarter-mile from the bomb site. Before her were multiple screens showing different camera angles. The drone overhead, the robot's camera, and several fixed positions around the perimeter. Sergeant Reynolds stood near the robot, dressed in the heavy EOD protective suit. His voice came through clear on the radio. Captain, I'm ready to send the robot in for a closer look. Proceed, Sergeant, Sarah replied, her eyes scanning every detail on the screens. Move slowly. These old bombs can be sensitive to even ground vibrations. The small, tracked robot rolled forward, its camera providing a close-up view as it approached the partially buried bomb. Sarah's expert eye cataloged every detail. Stop, she said suddenly. Zoom in on the nose cone. The camera focused. There, barely visible under the rust and corrosion, was something that made Sarah's heart sink. Oh, God, she whispered. What is it, Captain? Reynolds asked, concern in his voice. That's not a standard fuse, Sarah said, her mind racing. Look at the configuration. That's an anti-handling device. Someone modified this bomb. This wasn't just dropped and forgotten. This was deliberately placed. The implications hit everyone in the command center at once. This wasn't an old training munition accidentally left behind. This was a deliberately planted bomb, possibly from an old sabotage attempt or a forgotten Cold War-era exercise. And anti-handling devices meant one thing. If anyone tried to move or defuse the bomb incorrectly, it would detonate immediately. Patterson's face was grim. Can we still defuse it? Sarah studied the images, her years of training and experience analyzing every angle. It's possible, but it's incredibly dangerous. That anti-handling device is corroded too. It might be inert or it might be hypersensitive. We won't know until we start working on it. Controlled detonation, Patterson suggested. We'd need to pack explosives around it to ensure complete destruction of the main charge, Sarah explained. But with that much corrosion and an unknown anti-handling device, the act of placing the charges could set it off. Plus, a controlled det of a 500-pound bomb this close to base facilities would still cause significant damage. She ran calculations in her head, considering options, weighing risks. There had to be a way. Captain, Reynolds' voice crackled over the radio. What's the call? I can attempt to defuse it if you walk me through it. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. She pictured Reynolds, young, capable, but inexperienced with this specific type of threat. She imagined him carefully following her instructions, his hand steady but uncertain. She imagined that one moment of hesitation, that 1 second of doubt that could cost him his life. Then she imagined telling his wife, his parents, that she'd sent him in when she could have prevented it. Her eyes opened. Sergeant, stand by. She turned to Colonel Patterson, who stood beside her in the mobile command unit. Sir, I need to do this myself. Absolutely not, Patterson said immediately. Captain, you're pregnant. I can't authorize— Sir, with respect, we both know Reynolds isn't ready for this. That anti-handling device changes everything. One mistake and he's gone. But I've done this before. I know these old systems. I can read the corrosion patterns, understand the degradation of the components. I have the best chance of doing this successfully. Patterson's face was torn. Sarah, if something happens to you, to your baby, I can't order you to do this. I won't. You're not ordering me, sir. I'm volunteering. This is what I trained for. This is why I became an EOD technician. She placed her hand on her belly. And this is exactly the kind of world I want my daughter to grow up in. One where people step up when they're needed. Even when it's hard. Before Patterson could respond, Lieutenant Hastings's voice came over the radio. He was outside near the perimeter. "Colonel, this is insane. You can't let a pregnant woman approach a live bomb. It's against every regulation, every safety protocol. Send me instead. I can do this." Sarah grabbed the radio. "Lieutenant, have you ever neutralized an anti-handling device on a 60-year-old munition?" "Silence, I have," Sarah continued. 3 times. Anti-handling devices are designed to kill the person trying to defuse the bomb. They're triggered by movement, vibration, sometimes even changes in light or temperature. Each one is different, and with this level of corrosion, we can't even be sure what trigger mechanism we're dealing with. This requires experience, not bravado. More silence. Then Hastings spoke again, his voice tight. "Fine, but this is on you, Captain. If you get yourself killed trying to prove a point..." "This isn't about proving a point, Lieutenant," Sarah cut him off. "This is about saving lives with the skills I've spent my entire career developing. Now clear the channel. I need to focus." She looked at Patterson one more time. The colonel's eyes were troubled, but he nodded slowly. "God be with you, Sarah." Sarah stood, feeling the weight of her pregnancy, the physical limitations she'd been working around for months. But her mind was sharp, her hands were steady, and her resolve was absolute. 10 minutes later, she was suited up in the EOD protective gear. The suit was designed for a person who wasn't 6 months pregnant, and it took some creative adjusting to make it fit. The extra weight on her belly made movement awkward, but Sarah had trained in worse conditions. She approached the bomb site slowly, each step deliberate and measured. Through the suit's helmet, she could hear her own breathing, steady and controlled. Years of meditation and stress management training kicked in automatically, keeping her heart rate low, her mind clear. The partially buried bomb came into view. Even through layers of rust and dirt, it was menacing. 500 pounds of explosive power, old and unstable, rigged with a device meant to kill anyone who tried to disarm it. "Okay," Sarah said into her radio, her voice calm. "I'm beginning visual assessment." She knelt beside the bomb carefully, her pregnant belly making the movement more difficult than it should have been. Up close, she could see more details. The anti-handling device was a type she'd encountered once before in Afghanistan, on an old Soviet munition. The design was similar, a mechanical switch that would trigger if the bomb was moved or if the casing was opened improperly. But this one was corroded. Pieces of the mechanism were visible through gaps in the rusted metal. That was both good and bad. Good because she could see what she was working with. Bad because corrosion made everything unpredictable. "Talk to me, Captain," Patterson's voice said in her ear. "What do you see?" "The anti-handling device is a pressure release switch," Sarah explained, her gloved hands carefully brushing dirt away from the mechanism. "It's designed to detonate if pressure is removed from a specific point. Problem is, 60 years of rust means I can't tell if it's still active or if it's frozen in place." "Can you bypass it?" Patterson asked. "I'm going to try, but I need to access the main fuse first to understand the full picture." Working slowly, Sarah used small tools to carefully excavate around the nose cone of the bomb. Sweat dripped down her face inside the helmet. The suit was hot. Her pregnant body was already running warmer than normal, and the Colorado sun beat down mercilessly. She felt the baby move inside her, a gentle flutter. For just a moment, Sarah froze. What was she doing? She was kneeling next to 500 pounds of high explosives, risking not just her own life but her daughter's. But then she thought of all the people she was protecting, the soldiers, the families, the civilians who worked on base. This was her job. This was her calling. "Stay with Mama," she whispered so quietly the radio couldn't pick it up. "We're going to be okay." Her hands continued their careful work. After 15 minutes, she'd exposed enough of the fuse mechanism to understand the full system. "Colonel, I've got good news and bad news," she said. "Give me the good news first," Patterson replied. "The main fuse is corroded to the point where it's probably non-functional. If I can successfully bypass the anti-handling device, the bomb itself is likely inert. And the bad news? The anti-handling device is definitely still active. I can see the mechanism, and it's under tension. If I make one wrong move, it triggers immediately." Sarah heard murmurs over the radio. Someone, it sounded like Hastings, swore softly. "Can you do this, Captain?" Patterson asked. The question was genuine, not doubting, but needing to know. Sarah studied the mechanism. It was a type she'd dealt with before, but never in this condition. The corrosion had actually exposed internal components that would normally be hidden. That gave her an advantage. She could see exactly how it was configured. Yes, sir, she said with confidence she genuinely felt. I can do this. The next 30 minutes were the longest of Sarah's life, working with tools that seemed too large for the delicate work. Hampered by the bulky protective suit and her pregnancy, she carefully dismantled the anti-handling device piece by piece. Every movement was calculated. Every breath was controlled. Her training took over completely, her conscious mind stepping back to let years of muscle memory and experience guide her hands. She isolated the pressure switch first, carefully inserting a thin piece of metal to maintain the pressure, even as she removed surrounding components. Then she traced the wiring, old cloth-covered wiring that crumbled at the slightest touch. I'm disconnecting the primary trigger wire now, she narrated for the team listening remotely. Nice and slow. Got it, the wire came free. Sarah held her breath. Nothing happened. The bomb remained inert. Primary trigger disabled, she announced. Moving to the secondary system. There's a secondary? Hastings' voice sounded worried. There's always a secondary on these old anti-handling devices, Sarah explained patiently. The Soviets designed them that way, and we copied the approach for our own munitions. You disable what looks like the main trigger, you get confident, you move the bomb, and boom, the secondary gets you. She located the secondary trigger hidden beneath the main fuse housing. This one was even more corroded, but also more dangerous. It was a mercury switch designed to detonate if the bomb was tilted more than a few degrees. This is the tricky part, Sarah murmured. I need to neutralize the mercury switch without changing the angle of the bomb. Her hands moved carefully, using a long, thin tool to reach the switch. The baby kicked suddenly, a strong movement that made Sarah's belly visibly shift even under the protective suit. She froze absolutely still, her hand extended, the tool millimeters from the mercury switch. Any movement, any change in position, could tilt the bomb just enough to trigger the device. Captain, you okay? Reynolds asked, concern in his voice. Fine, Sarah said through gritted teeth. Just fine. She waited for the baby to settle, forced her breathing to remain calm, and then, with a surgeon's precision, she completed the movement. The tool slipped into position. She carefully drained the mercury from the switch into a small container, rendering it harmless. Secondary trigger neutralized, she announced. The anti-handling device is now completely disabled. Cheers erupted over the radio, but Sarah wasn't done. She still needed to confirm the main fuse was truly inert and ensure there were no other surprises. 20 minutes later, after a thorough examination and the careful placement of a small disrupting charge to destroy the fuse mechanism completely, Sarah stood up. Her back ached, her legs were shaking with fatigue, and she was drenched in sweat inside the protective suit. Colonel Patterson, the device is neutralized. We can now safely extract it for proper disposal. More cheers. Sarah walked slowly back to the mobile command unit, each step feeling like she was carrying twice her normal weight. When she finally emerged from the protective suit, she was immediately surrounded by people. Sergeant Reynolds was first, his eyes shining with respect and gratitude. Captain, I've never seen anything like that. Thank you for not making me do something I wasn't ready for. You'd have done fine, Sergeant, Sarah said kindly, though they both knew it wasn't quite true. But this is why we train, why we specialize, so when the hard cases come up, we're ready. Colonel Patterson approached, his face a mixture of relief and something else. Deep, profound respect. Captain Mitchell, what you just did. I don't have words. You saved lives today, possibly dozens of lives, Sarah smiled tiredly. Just doing my job, sir. No, Patterson said firmly. You went far beyond your job. You volunteered for something incredibly dangerous when you could have walked away. That's not duty. That's heroism. He turned to address everyone gathered around. I want everyone here to remember what they witnessed today. Captain Mitchell is 6 months pregnant. She could have refused this mission on medical grounds alone. Instead, she recognized that she had the best chance of success, and she put the lives of everyone on this base ahead of her own safety and comfort. That is the kind of soldier we should all aspire to be. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were interrupted by the sound of someone slowly clapping. She turned to see Lieutenant Hastings approaching. His face was hard to read. "That was impressive, Captain," he said stiffly. "I was wrong about you. I thought—" He paused, struggling with the words. "I thought your pregnancy made you weak. I thought you were here to prove some political point. But what you just did, that took more guts than anything I've ever done. I'm sorry for how I treated you. You earned my respect today." He saluted crisply. Sarah returned the salute, seeing genuine contrition in his eyes. "Apology accepted, Lieutenant," she said. "And for what it's worth, I understand the skepticism. It's hard to see past appearances sometimes, but that's why we judge people by their actions, not our assumptions." The next few hours were a blur of debriefings, medical checkups, and paperwork. The base doctor examined Sarah thoroughly and declared both her and the baby completely healthy, though he insisted she take the next few days off to rest. That evening, Sarah finally made it home to her small house off base. Tom was waiting at the door, and the moment she saw him, the emotional dam broke. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing with relief, exhaustion, and the release of tension she'd been holding all day. "I heard," Tom whispered, holding her tight. "The whole base is talking about it. My God, Sarah, I was terrified when someone told me what you'd done." "I had to," Sarah said through her tears. "I was the only one who could do it safely. I couldn't let someone else die when I had the skills to prevent it." "I know," Tom said, pulling back to look at her face. "And I'm so proud of you. So incredibly proud. But please tell me you're going to take your maternity leave now. No more playing hero until after the baby comes." Sarah laughed wetly. "Deal. I think I've had enough excitement for one pregnancy." 3 months later, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Hope, because that's what she represented. Hope for a better future. Hope that strength and courage would always triumph over prejudice and doubt. The story of what Sarah had done spread far beyond Fort Carson. She received commendations from the Army, recognition from the explosive ordnance disposal community, and even a letter from the Secretary of Defense. But the moment that meant the most came 2 weeks after Hope was born. Sarah was at home, still on maternity leave, when there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Lieutenant Hastings standing there, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Lieutenant?" Sarah said, surprised. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, ma'am. I wanted to bring you this." He held out a small package wrapped in simple paper. "And to tell you something." Sarah invited him in, and they sat in her living room while baby Hope slept in a bassinet nearby. "I grew up with a very traditional father," Hastings began slowly. "Military family, very old-school ideas about gender roles. I was taught that women in combat roles were a distraction, a liability. I joined the Army with those beliefs, and I never questioned them. Not until I saw you defuse that bomb." He gestured to the package. "My father called me last week. He'd heard about what happened. It made national news. And he told me he was wrong. He said any soldier, male or female, who would risk their life like that while pregnant deserves the utmost respect. Coming from him, that was significant." Sarah opened the package. Inside was a small silver pendant shaped like the EOD badge, the bomb with lightning bolts. Attached was a note in shaky handwriting. "For Captain Mitchell, a true American hero. With respect and apologies, Colonel James Hastings, U.S. Army, retired." Tears filled Sarah's eyes again. "Please thank your father for me." "I will, ma'am. And I wanted to tell you that you changed my mind about a lot of things. I'm a better soldier and a better man because of what you taught me." He glanced at baby Hope. "She's lucky to have you as a mom." After Hastings left, Sarah sat holding her daughter, looking at the pendant. She thought about all the battles she'd fought. Not just against bombs and enemies overseas, but against prejudice, against assumptions, against people who thought she didn't belong. But she also thought about the victories. The lives saved, the respect earned, the minds changed. Tom came in from the kitchen and sat beside her. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah smiled, looking down at Hope's tiny, peaceful face. "I'm thinking about how glad I am that she'll grow up in a world where women like me prove that strength isn't about gender. It's about courage, skill, and the willingness to stand up when it matters most." "You certainly proved that," Tom said, kissing her forehead. Sarah thought back to that day on the base, kneeling beside 500 pounds of explosives while carrying their daughter. She'd been terrified, but she'd also been certain. Certain of her skills, certain of her duty, and certain that doing the right thing sometimes means doing the hard thing. The baby stirred and opened her eyes, blue like Tom's, bright and curious. Sarah smiled down at her daughter. "You're going to do amazing things, little Hope," she whispered. "And nobody is ever going to tell you what you can't do, because your mama defused a bomb while pregnant, and if she can do that, you can do anything." Outside, the sun set over Fort Carson, casting long shadows across the base where Sarah had proven that courage has no gender, that expertise trumps prejudice, and that a mother's strength is the most powerful force in the world. They had laughed at the pregnant soldier, but in the end she'd had the last word, not through anger or revenge, but through excellence, bravery, and an unshakable commitment to protecting others. And that was a victory that would echo for generations to come.